It is the Blue Room. It is your weekly show. I'm your host, Matt Jones. Dave Downey taking over Subscribers Weekly this week. And joining me, I'd like to say, back on the show after a short break, is Mick Reno. Mick, how are you doing, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, all things considered. Not too bad.
It's been a bit of a slog while you've not been here. For anyone who's not familiar with you being on these pods, very much into your data and analysis, and I've missed the comforting thoughts that you may have had in the past about how things are going to be okay. There's no need to panic. So I'm glad you're back to try and provide a bit of perspective to all this. Before we get into all that, just a reminder: if you're watching us on YouTube, do hit like, do hit subscribe. Do leave a comment on any of the stuff we talk about today. And if you listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere else, do leave us a rating, do leave us a review. All these things help. Mick, we're going to sort of go through the negatives and the positives of the last few weeks and take a bit of a look at them. But just overall, after Saturday and the loss to Southampton, and I suppose the performance against Fulham as well, really, if you want to pair the two of them together, how are you feeling overall about things? Because the fallout from Saturday in particular, I feel like it's been very, very strong.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one, actually. I mean, I think this show in itself comes at a good time. Obviously, like you touched on there, in terms of quite into the analytics side of things, and obviously I suppose that the reason for stuff like that is to have a very objective view of things. Not to get too high when things are unsustainably good, and not to get too low when things are a bit crap. But actually, thinking about like the start of last season, for instance, and I've not actually managed to watch a game live since Newcastle. Just been busy gallivanting and stuff like that. Obviously watched the games back and watched the highlights in some cases. I definitely wasn't watching the Fulham game back because I could tell that wasn't a good match. But I've watched the Southampton game back. So it's been a while since I've seen us live. So the numbers kind of, I think, especially from the last 3 games anyway. I think it's 4 games we played Newcastle. Yeah, so last 3. Are definitely objective in the way I've looked at it. I think it's a common consensus, really, that it's been a pretty poor start. I don't think that's helped by the I think there's the stat going around from Opta today about how Everton have had the easiest start of the season in terms of the fixture list. I'm not sure I can completely buy into that being like the worst thing in the world, because I still think we've had difficult fixtures, and I think we obviously first 4 games I thought were quite tough. Obviously, it's going to look easier when you play the 3 promoted teams, when other teams might not have played the promoted sides at all yet. But even the promoted fixtures have all been away from home. And I think if you looked at it from the start of the season, if you were told, the team's probably still going to be quite unsettled after 10 games, I think it's still fair to say that a lot of positions are, probably uncommitted at this point. There's a lot of talk about players in and out of form. The midfield really seems to, especially the midfield 2, really seems to have stuck together for the consecutive games yet. Harrison and Lindstrom always seem to be swapping positions. Jarrad Branthwaite only played once. So I think that definitely comes into it as well. And I think if you were told that before the start of the season, and we're told, that's what the opening 10 games are going to look like, I don't think you'd be like, oh, well, those run 10 games are going to be quite easy, and, we are going to be averaging 1.5 points a game or stuff like that. But that's not, I don't think you can still use that as an excuse. Because I think probably in the same way as I mentioned beforehand, in terms of using the metrics at the beginning of last year to after the opening 10 or 15 games, probably mainly opening 10 games, that we were actually performing quite all right. We weren't as good as the XG said. I remember in the preview to the Anfield derby that year, I think it was the Guardian ran with Everton have got a better attack than Liverpool before that game, which not the way to use statistics. But I'm not sure. I mean, in terms of those 10 games at the opening 10 games start last season and start of this season, the important thing really is always the performances, because it doesn't really matter unless you have like a brilliant start of the season. I don't think the results really tell you much for the rest of the season. It's kind of what's underlying, and I think it's fair to say that Everton have probably been the 16th best side in the league, and I've performed like the 16th best side of the league. I think expected points wise, we should be on 10 or 11, and we're on 9. So yeah, I think the issue probably is the performances more than anything else. I remember the Crystal Palace game in particular, the first half. I thought we were pretty dreadful then, and came out second half, and we were better. Obviously scored both goals to come back to that game, and then I think it was Newcastle straight after that. I think again there was like extenuating circumstances for why we might not have played that well, but I think in the most recent block of fixtures, I would have expected a reaction in terms of performance. I would have expected our performance level to take a natural jump by having someone like Branthwaite back in the team, and that hasn't happened. And I think that's probably my biggest concern is that the performances just aren't that good. And I think it's not. I don't think they've massively dropped off from anywhere. I think at the end of last season, even when I think we won, was it 3 or 4 games in a row, and then drew at Luton. Obviously the results are there. We weren't as bad as that the end of the really poor run when we were getting demolished by Chelsea or Newcastle away is one that sticks in my mind, is where we were really crap that day. I don't think we're as bad as that, but I do feel like we just kind of stagnated to where we were at the end of last season, and nothing's really improved, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting assessment. And just before we start, like I sort of asked you to send over some like potential topics to touch upon and look a bit deeper at the numbers, and you sort of got in negatives and positives. So we'll get the negatives out of the way first. The first one you've said, you kind of touched upon it there, is general performances. And one thing which I've actually seen quite a lot, I don't think I've seen this before really. I don't know if it's just because it's like Daesh and he refers to this kind of thing a lot, but people comparing our performances against the same opposition this season compared to last season, and that seems like we're well down. Or around 4 points down on that comparison.
Yeah, so it's actually something I noted down myself, and that we're 9 points this season from the same fixtures. We had 13 last year, and then I think that the stark one is that obviously this year I mentioned before that we expected to have around 10 or 11 points from those, not in terms of predictions beforehand, but in terms of what the actual performances should have led to in results. So around 11 points. Whereas from the same fixtures last year, we would have had 23. I mean, obviously that's a massive we obviously underperformed quite a lot in terms of we only had 13 instead of 23. But if you compare the 23 expected points dropping off to 11, it's a massive amount. Again, like I said beforehand, I think there are certain circumstances and factors to bear in mind that, for reasons. I think that the Newcastle home tie last season I thought was probably one of our best performances of the season outside of the derby, maybe actually even more of a complete performance. And I don't think we were ever going to I don't think we were ever going to be able to reach those heights again with the team we were able to put out. Just off the top of my head, I think it was the first game back after Branthwaite had then re-injured himself. I don't think we had Mykolenko as well. So we were kind of like a bit discombobulated in terms of how the starting XI was set up. But there's definitely been a notable drop in terms of not necessarily the results, but the extremes, especially even if you compare the opening 10 games to last season, obviously even not just the same fixtures. A lot of I think that I was, especially on social media, that was when a lot of the talk of XG and XG will pay you back was kind of around, and it was obviously frustrating a lot of people. Understandably, I get why people don't like it, but there was for good reason why people were using it, and that can't be used now, because I think we are actually. I actually can't remember our defensive numbers, but I think our attacking numbers we've actually scored around about the same amount of goals we should have done. So it's not like we're massively overperforming or underperforming. It's just where we are at the moment. And to be honest, I think those who are kind of a little bit more not satisfied or neutral, but not like worried about it, would probably say, well, if we're performing as the 16th side in the league, it's probably where we're at, which I can understand and kind of agree myself. But there's got to be more substance to the performance itself, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting, and also interesting the next point you sort of put down on here, and I imagine the second point you put down, the third one, linked together quite well. And some of the negative section you put about McNeil's impact in the middle, both defensively and offensively. And I imagine that maybe people who don't watch us every week, if they said who's been Everton's best player this season, they would go straight to Dwight McNeil. And I suppose in a funny sort of way that might be true still, individually. If you're looking at who's played the best, he's got 3 goals, 3 assists. But it's just felt like in the last couple of games in particular, the teams are getting a little bit wise to it. And based on what you put down there, offensively, it's starting to not work quite as well. And defensively, and I imagine this goes on to your next point, which is about pressing changes compared to last season, it's having a bit of a knock-on impact as well.
Yeah, I think this is something that we spoke about last time I was on the show, in terms of I wasn't fully convinced by it. I was happy to see it tested. I think Paddy might have spoken about it on the Byline podcast before, in terms of, when he was originally bought, obviously he'd only ever played for Dyche beforehand. And he was always utilised out on the left, sometimes on the right, but primarily the left. And I think Everton were a little bit more open-minded when he was signed. And obviously when Dyche came in for the opening 18 months, it was left midfield, occasionally left wing back, and that was it. So it was nice, and I think it was good to see some sort of experimentation, because it's not something that I don't think Dyche really does. But I did kind of feel like the worries and my concerns as to why McNeil wouldn't work in the centre have kind of came true, I suppose, in terms of, and I don't think it kind of impacts, I don't think it's impacting McNeil himself, which I think it's why it's a little bit harder to maybe try and like I suppose understand and notice, because like you said, I think individually he's having a really good season. And I think you're right in terms of, if you asked external people, or even the majority of Evertonians, I think McNeil would probably be, player of the season so far. And obviously he went through that phase. I think he might have 2 goals, 4 assists, I think, so far this season, which after 10 games is, not to be sniffed at from anyone, especially, a lower half side. But I don't think I suppose the ambition of the move is kind of played out. I think if you'd asked Dyche now what was the reason behind the move to McNeil, I think partly would be because, they didn't necessarily trust Ndiaye in the middle, or thought he might be better suited out wide in this team. So therefore, McNeil's got to go centrally. And also the other probably main reason would be, probably one of our bigger criticisms from last season was our creativity outside of set pieces was relatively poor, and therefore the easy solution there is you take out your more defensive natured, robust, less creative or less technically gifted player in Doucouré out of the number 10 position, and put in someone who you'd say is a more natural creative player in McNeil, and then that should have a positive effect. But it just hasn't really. I think I was having a look just beforehand in terms of our open play expected goal numbers, and still the season after 10 games, our only game where we've created more than 1 expected goal in open play, ignoring penalties or set pieces. I don't think we've had a penalty so far this season anyway, but the Bournemouth game at home is the only time we've managed to create more than 1, and I think the last 3 fixtures have both been 0.6, which is not good enough. I think last year we averaged around 0.9, which is still not great. You'd like to be thinking you could create more than 1 per game. So it's definitely not had the impact that was desired on the rest of the team, because objectively speaking, we're not creating any more than we were beforehand, and if anything, it's probably hampering 2 players who probably aren't in their natural position. I still think, I think if someone else as a head coach walked in tomorrow afternoon and decides to pick the team for West Ham, I think straight away you'd probably see McNeil back out on the left, and you'd probably see Ndiaye back in the middle. So for me, it'd just be like, experiment over and put them back in their more natural positions. And then you alluded to it, the fact that it's also having an impact defensively, which is probably more of my main concern at the time, because I agreed with that. Yeah, having a more creative number 10 player in that actual position might actually benefit the attack, but it hasn't. And then if you look at the defensive numbers last year, outside of set pieces, our next best form of attacking was I suppose defender from the front, basically breaking down, build up play from the opposition. I think it's called high turnovers, and I think it actually identifies. I think it's the first 30 meters of the pitch, and then anything else after that's like just a middle turnover or whatever. So last year we were one of the best in the league. I think we were 5th highest at 9.6 high turnovers per 90. That's dropped down to about 7 already this season. We were averaging predominantly around about 10 per game last year until it dropped off towards the end of the season, which I think was an impact of that run we were on. And then we're also averaging a lot fewer amount of those turnovers turned into shots now as well. So I think we were 1.6 something or 1.7 last season, and now around about 1.2. So I think that is a consequence of not just not having McNeil in there, but also not having Doucouré in there as well. But I also just don't think McNeil's got that energy and that robustness to, be an aggressive presser. I think he's got a good engine in him, but he's not got good acceleration. He's not someone who's going to be able to chase the ball from one end to the other end of just passing it around him, if that makes sense. He's not really got that, I suppose, leap in him, I suppose. So I kind of expected that to happen, and that just, I suppose it has. We're just not creating as much from those situations anymore. And really, before Dyche came, those were 2 areas that you'd identify as, set pieces and high turnovers to create opportunities, and you can't just rely on set pieces.
Yeah, and that you say Doucouré there, and we've spoken about the Doucouré quirk on this show loads, and since Dyche came in and extends to managers previous to him as well, he's still not won a game without him in the 11. I think I'm right in saying, because the two we've had the season have been Palace and Ipswich away. Obviously, in the weekend he's not available, and when we get to Southampton and don't win, and I get why he wasn't playing, and I understand he's not been playing anywhere near as well as he was around this time last year, but it's clear that it's clearly something in that, it feels like, and maybe it is that thing you said there in regards to, as much as he can be very clumsy on the ball and can really wind you up with some of his decision making at time, it feels like in that number 10 position, if you want someone to hold the shape when necessary and then press when necessary, he's probably our best bet at it. And while he's not creative with the ball at his feet, while he's not creative with the ball at his feet, the other bits he does kind of acts like a creative outlet for us, sort of inadvertently, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think especially for a team like us, you can't underestimate someone who covers the ground that he covers, whether he's the most pristine footballer or always makes the right decisions. He's always there, if that makes sense. Not necessarily in the same way that, Idrissa Gueye used to be, where, it doesn't matter what side of the pitch, whether it be a defender from the front or defending deep, he'd always be there trying to nip in and tackling interceptions, that type of stuff. Doucouré's not as active from that side of things, but he's still a presence. And, you go back to the goal we conceded on Saturday, and, the whole thing was a mess, really. It was pretty chaotic. But the thing that stuck out to me, and I'm not blaming the 2 midfielders for the goal or either fullback for the goal either. I just think it was clear to me that there was someone with that type of engine, and I don't think you can't say for certain that having Doucouré in there would have prevented the goal. Obviously not. It still might have happened, but for me, when you replace someone with Mangala, who's definitely obviously better with the ball and will need to assume his pass completion's a lot higher than someone like Doucouré's, but I just don't think he's got that ability to cover the ground that we need in the centre of the park. And I think it'd be something that maybe was probably undervalued from Amadou Onana last season, in terms of, again, similar to Doucouré, and that's probably not the most active when it comes to the tackling and interceptions, and isn't the most aggressive, and therefore doesn't get highlight for it as much as someone like Idrissa Gueye. But because of his ability to cover the ground, his long legs, there was the amount of times I think last season we saw where we would turn around quite easily, and he was able to just, in a lot quicker time, just because of his size and stature, he was able to get back into shape a lot quicker than the other midfielders. And I think we missed that, and I think that's why Doucouré's, actually been quite helpful in a little bit more of a deeper position. I think we'll probably touch on it when it comes to the positives, and that the defensive numbers have started to look better over the last 6 games since Irabunim's came out of the side. Not to blame it on him solely, but since we've had a more disciplined and mature midfield too. We started to look a little bit more solid. We're not conceding as many chances. And I think it helps to have someone in a team like us where a lot of it isn't, a lot of the game you don't have the ball. You need to have players who are good runners. And I think we missed that on Saturday. And yeah, I think that it's clear. It's clear to why for me anyway, it's clear that's why he has such an integral role in this team, even if he's not the prettiest of players.
Yeah. I think that stat says a lot. And like, as much as sometimes it doesn't pass the eye test, it's maybe not one we can just ignore. You hinted at the next section there. So this sort of straddles the negative and the positive, because I know you want to talk about Jarrad Branthwaite, and I saw you tweet over the weekend, and I was kind of hoping you were going to bring this up because it's inexplicable to me. I was hoping you could maybe bring some sense to it. So you put that about the use of Jarrad Branthwaite, but also under the positives, as you mentioned, the defending has got better since September. So it's kind of a little bit of one of each. But it feels to me, Mick, like we have made some strides defensively, but it does also feel like with him in the team, it could be even better. And the usage or non-usage of our best player, and not just what he adds to the team as himself, but what he brings to everybody else around him, I just find quite perplexing.
Yeah, I mean, I think just focusing solely on Branthwaite firstly, I listened to the Byline podcast this morning, and Paddy pretty much echoed exactly what I was thinking on Saturday when it came to the non-use of Branthwaite, and that no matter the form of the other defenders or the form of the team as a whole without them, there's got to be some sort of not external thinking, but some sort of bigger picture thinking, and that this is a player in the summer that we rated as 70-80 million pounds. Probably, for someone who I thought last season was maybe the best defender that I'd seen in Everton shirt. Jagielka levels, really, maybe even better. Obviously, Jagielka has had a lot more longevity and it's a bigger sample size than just that 1 year. But there were times last season where Branthwaite was just absolutely exceptional. And there was a reason why, as much as a lot of Evertonians can kind of border on delusional at times, there was a lot of reason where there's reasons for why in the summer when Manchester United were lowballing us, or when Manchester United were after them full stop, we were like, he's better than that football club 100%. So to now be in a situation where, first of all, the fact that he's only played one game after 10. Like I said at the beginning of the show, if you told me that at the start of the season that he's only going to play once until November, then I'd be worried. But questions need to be asked why he's been on the bench for the last 3 games. When evidently he's been fit. I gave benefit of the doubt at Ipswich and again against Fulham that maybe he's not 100% fit. Obviously, he brought back against Crystal Palace and then re-injured himself. So it's understandable to want to, I suppose, take some care with a player of that, the player of that nature and how crucial he was to us last season. But for me, the top and bottom of it is that a player that good, it doesn't matter the form of anyone else. For me, he's still the first name on the team sheet, and it baffles me. How we kind of got into a situation where Dyche kind of thinks that he's just another first team player, and I get, like, I suppose from his position, you can't treat other players, or you can't be seen to be treat other players better than others, and they're all equal and so on and so forth. But really, Jarrad Branthwaite's not equal to Michael Keane. You made the points, I think, this morning about how if it was Liverpool, then it would be, and it was Virgil van Dijk, for instance, then he'd be straight back into the side. And I don't think we can afford to just be like, especially in a game, especially Southampton last week, I think after Ipswich kind of understand it, and that it was our best performance of our season, largely. We just kept a clean sheet. Going into Fulham, I can kind of understand, not changing it. I don't necessarily agree with it. You don't change a winning team, but I think the majority of people could kind of get that. And I think if I remember the team news against Fulham, a lot of people were just like, I'd probably play Branthwaite, but it's what it is. But I think after the performance against Fulham, and then I suppose not the magnitude against Southampton, because it's not like it was a 6 points or anything, but if we had won, I think we would have gone 11 points clear of Southampton after 10 games. That's a massive gap. So it was still an important game. for him to then not come straight into the side, it was a bit like, well, and I think Paddy again touched on this, is that Dyche doesn't seem to be implying that it's fitness. He just seems to be putting across that, the other two defenders are playing quite well, and therefore he's not on the team. And for me, I just don't think that's good enough. And I think it kind of undervalues him firstly, but also undervalues the effect he has on the team. We spoke about the pressing beforehand, and last year we were not one of the most active pressers, because we're still very keen to be quite low at times, and quite keen to be compact when other teams had stable possession around the halfway line and stuff. But we were really aggressive from goal kicks, hence our ability to create opportunities from high turnovers. And we saw it against Southampton in terms of how aggressive and man-to-man we were at times on Saturday. And that's Branthwaite's asset, really. You go back to, we have West Ham on Saturday, I think it's Saturday, innit? And the goal was scored because they were building up. The ball went long into the striker. Branthwaite throws Antonio to the floor, wins the ball fairly cleanly, sets in Calvert-Lewin and Jack Harrison, and we score. Obviously it's an easy example because we score from it, but to think that he's just a good defender and it's going to have an impact defensively. He helped the whole team, and I don't think we have a player like that in the rest of the squad. Maybe Calvert-Lewin when he's on his day, and maybe he'd miss Pickford throughout the course of the season. He didn't play. But in terms of having an impact on the whole wider performance and the rest of the players, and Tarkowski next to him and Mykolenko next to him, both players who I don't think have played well this season, for him to just be on the bench and it not be fitness related, to me is just, I said it before, it just isn't good enough.
Yeah, it's you're right. It feels like if there was any kind of tiny thing about it to do with fitness, that the manager would have said it, just as because then people will sort of go, well, it does kind of make sense.
It's an easy excuse. Yeah, excuse.
It's an easy get out. So I think for him to be sort of, very honest about it has maybe been his downfall a little bit. But other than that, it's the defensive performances feel like this just gradually trending upward based on what you were saying there. With I think obviously Ashley Young's he probably has sort of certainly been our best defender this season, hasn't he? Keane, I think it's Branthwaite and one other. I feel like there's definitely a chat on whether it's Keane or Tarkowski at this point as well. Maybe Pickford's just settled down a little bit after a bit of a ropey start to the season as well. So the numbers seem to suggest that defensively we're slowly finding our feet.
Yeah, so at the start of the season we were probably the worst defensively we'd been up and since like the opening times when Dyche first came in, when he took over from Lampard. And I said at the time that I don't think it's an easy quick fix for Dyche, because the way he likes to defend is quite aggressive, quite hard to get used to, and different to Lampard. And as such, our defensive numbers plummeted from Lampard in terms of an expected goals point of view. And the first 4 games of the season, it was first 4, we were just, I think chaotic was probably the word I'd use. Easy to say when you're 2-0 up with 87 minutes gone and you lose 3-2 against Bournemouth. But even the games where there was no red cards, the Tottenham game, the Brighton game, less so the Aston Villa game, but still at times there was just we were go back to the pressing beforehand. We were almost too pressy. We were far too aggressive than we needed to be. And I think I've mentioned before on the show with yourself, and that especially against the bigger teams, Dyche almost seems to just go, it's a bit of a free hit. We'll go aggressive. We'll go man-to-man against them. We'll see what we can do in terms of creating high up the pitch, but it leaves us vulnerable at the back. And I think at the beginning of the season, it wasn't just a case of, being too aggressive. It was a culmination of the opposition that we were playing against. We were missing key players. We had quite an inexperienced midfield in terms of Irabunum, midfielder and Irabunum. It was a system that was quite clearly not getting or exposing even Michael Keane. And I think recently, especially since Leicester, obviously the opponents haven't been as difficult since the opening 4 games, so being mindful of that. But we've dropped off a little bit again, linking back to that pressing. And whilst it's had, I don't think a good effect on the attack, it's definitely had a positive effect on the defence. So at the beginning of the year, we were conceding like 16, 17 shots a game. I think our expected goals per shot was like 0.16, which is like ridiculously high. Anything, the average around 0.10, 0.11. So 0.16 per shot was just ridiculous. But now on 0.06. So the drop, we're not conceding as many shots anymore, and the quality of those shots is dropped massively. So that, I mean, I don't think you can say that's definitely just down from the opposition. Like I said like I said before, I didn't watch the Southampton game live, but I do remember having a look at half time, and for all the possession that they'd only had one shot at half time, I think it was. So there's definitely signs of progression, and I think one of my worries up until a few weeks ago, and whilst some of them are still there, is that whilst we've been a little bit crap and the performance aren't as good, and there's not much to cling on to, I think we'd lost a lot, especially in the opening 4 or 5 games. We'd lost a lot of what we were good at last year, and our identity just we didn't align to that in terms of how we played last season. Whether people liked it or not, I thought we were very easy to identify what we were, which is something that I don't think you can say about an Everton team. I don't think you could say about an Everton team for a very long time. And we just kind of threw it out the window in the opening 4 games. And I think at least now that we are starting to resemble something more of a decent, robust, compact side. And, I'll always happily say that defence first when you're a team like Everton. If there's a way in which you can keep margins tight and be better defending than attacking, you'll more than likely stay up, because, I think case in point last year, you had, the other extreme in Luton, who tried to attack every game, and have fair play to him and everything. But I just don't think that's a good way to attack the league when you've got inferior starting 11 in the majority of your games, which I think you could probably say for Everton, not the overwhelming majority, but I think a good 50-60% of games this year, Everton will probably be the lesser side compared to the opposition, and therefore it's better for you to target those games and trying to keep margins tight. I think an example you could use, the famous data statistician in football says, if you looked at a game between, I think he used Burnley as an example under Sean Dyche, ironically, and when Burnley played Manchester United, and there's 6 goals in that game, you asked 100 people who've won that game, you're not saying Burnley. So it's easier, it's better for smaller or less weaker teams for margins to be tight. So it's the fact that I think we're getting back to that type of team. Even on Saturday, we probably should have won. We lost 1-0. It was a crappy performance overall, but we still created more than the opposition. I think that the last few weeks, I think we started to resemble something a little bit better, a little bit more, I suppose, resembling what we were at times last season. So I suppose if you want to cling on to something, there's that. But I think that, like we've spoken beforehand, in terms of the other side of the game, that needs to improve as well.
No, that's interesting, and it's like I imagine for you in particular, like you said, you feel like we're getting back to what we were, like a bit more robust and stuff like that. Like I didn't feel like that at all against Fulham. Certainly, like
No.
watching that game, and I know they didn't create loads of chances, but it felt like they had the chances to create loads of chances, and it was more down to them making bad decisions and being a bit careless in the final third to let us off, which I imagine is quite hard to quantify from like a statistical point of view in that sense. So it's one of them where, yeah, it's and like, what you're saying. I think, like, obviously if that better header goes in and we win 1-0, we are coming away going, well, that was quite a poor performance, but we kind of dug in and got over the line. And you can probably put it in the same bracket as going and winning 1-0 at Forest last year. So that type of performance where, like, again, that night we were fine, but like just got the chance and scored in the second half. So yeah, it's quite tough to countenance those two very different concepts. And the last thing you put on here, well, you mentioned about the XG underperformance, expected point of the performance, which we've spoken about already, but the comforting thing that we might be able to take from this is the comparison to teams below us, because, as in your words here, Mick, we're bad, but we're not that bad.
Yeah, maybe not the thing to say after we got beat by one of them on Saturday, but I still think that, I think there's a lot of people at the moment, and understandably, I get it, calling for Dyche's head at the moment and wanting them to make a change, or wanting, you spoke this morning about the limbo the club's effectively in. Or so when the new ownership comes in to make that change, and maybe that might happen, But for me, I think it's a case of, I'm not a fan of mid-season changes unless you absolutely have to. If you go back to the Lampard sacking, for instance, or the Benitez sacking, they were both made because both situations were completely untenable anymore. I think we might have been 19th under Lampard, but I know we had 15 points after 20 games. And we'll see how we get on over. I suppose that the next block, you'd assume by the end of the next block of fixtures going into Christmas that the Freegans will be in. So maybe a decision will be made anyway. But and maybe the fact that this is the case, it might come into their thinking of there's someone who they think is more of a long-term choice, who might not have the desired effect straight away. But if the rest of the league's a bit crap and you don't have to worry about relegation, then maybe you can still make that decision. But at the moment, for instance, we've been relatively poor. Our expected goal difference is around minus 0.3 so far this season, which isn't, I think around the average for relegation is around -6, -5. So it's not where you want to be.
Is that minus 0.3 per game or minus
0.3? Yeah, minus 0.3 per 90. Sorry,
okay,
yeah. Right. So -3 after 10 games, excluding penalties, that is. And then just got it up on my phone there. So Ipswich are by far and away the worst team in the league. They're -14 after 10. That's not per 90. They're not -14 per game, but they're -14 after 10. And then Southampton, Wolves, and Leicester are all -0.8, -0.9. So if we're -0.3, there's still decent margin. We're kind of in our own little limbo at the moment. So we're -0.3, and then the next best after us is Palace and West Ham just above. So for me, I don't see a scenario where Leicester, Wolves, Southampton and Ipswich get more points than what Luton and Burnley got last season. And if they do, I don't think it'll be more than 5 or 6 points. So if you're thinking about wanted to change the manager now, you got to look at is there someone immediately better out there? Do we really need to make that change, or are we better off waiting into the summer? I know both me and yourself are both big fans of someone like Andoni Iraola, who maybe might have worked himself out of contention for our job over the last couple of weeks.
He's the next City manager now, isn't he? So yeah, maybe out of our ambitions currently.
Yeah, maybe about 3 or 4 weeks ago we were about right with that one, but maybe not anymore. But I think the pool of managers available to be a definite improvement on the manager, and also the opportunity to work in pre-season, invest in the squad, which is definitely the most important thing. I'll go back to the fact that we're probably, if we are performing around 16th in the side, 16th in the league, I'd probably say we are about that, 14th to 17th. So, if you were Kevin Felwell and you had to make a decision to, sack Dyche, which I'd assume would cost, something around, 6 or 7 million, and then hire a new manager, is that going to be worth it for the sake of maybe moving up 2 or 3 places if there is no risk of relegation? Obviously, that changes if over the next group of fixtures that risk of relegation rises and the teams below us start picking up points. But for now, I think the fact that those teams are a lot worse than us, I know it might not look it from a points perspective so far. They're arguably performing from an expected goals point of view anyway worse than what Burnley, Sheffield United and Luton did at the start of last season, which kind of puts that into perspective. There's obviously the possibility that Leicester might get a points deduction later on in the season as well. So for me, it makes sense to just not rush into any decisions. It'd be different if there was a manager, waiting on the corner, absolutely world class and begging to become the manager of the football club. But I don't think that's the case with the current position, the group of players that we have. So for me, it just makes sense to see what happens over, I suppose, up until Christmas. You never know, there might be a possibility where we could invest in the squad in January, which might change my mind. But for now, I think whilst I'm disappointed and frustrated with the performances after the opening 10, I think probably in the camp of wanting more, not just from the opening 10, but hoping to see some sort of development from the end of last season, which we haven't seen. I'm not, worried. I'm not like, he's got to go tomorrow. And I know I'm sure that might rile a few people who definitely do feel like that. But for me, I think you just got to be sensible about it. And there's a lot of things that I think, without changing the manager first, could make us better tomorrow. But it's obviously up to the manager to make those decisions as well. Branthwaite being the obvious one. So I think first, before we get into any discussions about that, I think we just got to see how it goes over the next block, I think.
Yeah, it's that cycle, isn't it? Because it's like, you sack him now, which, would be justified, I think, and then you end up spending, like you said, 5-6 million on him and his staff going. You end up potentially giving the new person a bonus to keep us up, even if they're only here on like a 6-month contract. So that's 10 million already that's gone. And that in turn impacts the transfer budget. That in turn means you can't fully plan for the following season. It's that vicious cycle we've been on for years, hasn't it? We'd rather not avoid it, but in the same breath, it's like, if we lose the weekend, then that panic and that fear is just going to get ratcheted up even more. So,
I think just then quickly, I think because of the new owners as well, I think there's a real feeling in myself anyway. There's a real feeling that the summer could be a proper new start going into the new stadium. I'd expect if he ends up playing any games this season, Branthwaite to be sold. So that will seriously help PSR. So there should be investment into the squad as well. So for me, I can't help but go back, especially when the current pool of managers isn't great, and because you wouldn't expect us to be able to go out and not just sack Dyche and then give a bonus to a new manager, but actually pay a release clause for a manager and someone currently in work as well. For me, I don't want to rush into that decision and then waste what could be a really good opportunity to start again in the summer. It feels like a really crappy way, because I know from an emotional side of things, it's not the way people want to end the final year in Goodison, to be in that kind of limbo position. But for the benefit of the long term, I think we are better off waiting until then, unless we aren't.
Yeah, we'll find out. No, really, really enjoyed that, mate. I feel cleansed and calmed by your excellent analysis there. So yeah, we'll wrap it up there. If you watch us on YouTube, let us know your thoughts on any of that, any of those really interesting topics that Mick has touched upon there. Do hit the thumbs up. Do leave us, or do subscribe to the channel as well as we're doing more YouTube stuff. And if you're listening, leave us a rating, leave us a review. That's been your weekly show. We will have weekend preview coming up, as well as mailbag and instant reaction from the game on Saturday. And if you're not already, do check out Blue Monday, focusing on Dyche, and do check out the Everton byline, focusing on the overall situation at the club and the takeover, and whether it has left us a little bit paralysed. But we will leave it there. We'll speak to you again next week on the weekly. Up the Toffees.